What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
Every year, without fail, I'd wake up on my birthday and pretend not to notice the silence. No text. No call. No, happy birthday, sweetheart. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own footsteps echoing across the kitchen tiles. By noon, I'd convince myself it was fine, that adults didn't need attention for something as trivial as a birthday, that maybe this was how normal families behaved. But then, a week later, I'd watch my parents throw my brother a full-blown celebration, streamers, banners, a custom cake with his face printed in frosting, and I'd realize that pretending didn't make it hurt any less. It started when we were kids, though back then, it was easier to excuse. I'd get a quick, "we'll celebrate next weekend, honey," followed by a promise that never materialized. Caleb's parties, on the other hand, were practically festivals. There'd be bounce houses, barbecue, family friends driving in from out of town. My parents loved a good show, and Caleb was the perfect main act, athletic, funny, loud enough to fill a room. I was quieter, the kind of kid who got straight A's, but didn't make anyone laugh during dinner. Maybe that was my first mistake, thinking being good was enough to be noticed. The tradition carried on, long past childhood, morphing into something crueler because now there was no excuse. My mom would post on Facebook about Caleb's special day, tagging him in a long, sentimental paragraph. Meanwhile, my birthday came and went without so much as a comment. I told myself I didn't care, that I was too busy with work anyway, but every year the same dull ache found its way back in. It wasn't about the presents or the cake. It was about being invisible to the people who were supposed to see you first. This year, though, was different before it even began. Something in me had shifted, maybe from exhaustion, maybe from the quiet realization that waiting for acknowledgement was the most humiliating hobby I'd ever developed. My 30th birthday fell on a Tuesday, which meant I'd spend the morning in a conference room pretending to care about quarterly projections. My coworkers surprised me with a small chocolate cake, the cheap grocery store kind with icing that stains your teeth, but it still made me laugh. They sang off-key, and one of them, Jess, snapped a photo of me cutting the cake and said, "You're glowing, Erin. You should send that to your family." I smiled, but inside, the idea made me sick. What would be the point? They'd scroll past it like always. After work, I stopped by a small wine bar near my apartment and treated myself to a glass of Merlot. The air smelled faintly of oak and citrus, and for once, I didn't check my phone. I didn't need the confirmation that no one had remembered. I just sat there, quietly, feeling something I hadn't in years, detached, but in a way that felt almost peaceful. When I got home, there it was waiting for me, a message from my mother. For a split second, my heart jumped. Maybe this was the year she'd surprise me. Maybe she'd write something kind. I opened the text. "Don't forget Caleb's party next weekend. Bring potato salad if you can." I stared at the screen, feeling that small, familiar punch to the chest, followed by the same bitter laugh I'd been perfecting since childhood. It wasn't anger anymore, it was the absurdity of it. Of course, they remembered him. They always did. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji, because what else was there to say? She didn't notice the silence behind it. She never did. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the glow from the streetlight carving faint lines across my room. Somewhere between annoyance and exhaustion, I realized I didn't want to keep playing the same role in their story, the quiet, dutiful daughter whose absence never caused a dent. Maybe the best revenge wasn't confrontation. Maybe it was simply outgrowing the need to be seen by people who refused to look. The next morning, while sipping my coffee, I opened my laptop and started scrolling through emails. A subject line caught my eye, "Your annual performance bonus." My hand froze over the mouse as I clicked it open, eyes scanning the number twice to make sure I'd read it right. It was larger than last year, significantly larger. For the first time in a while, I smiled, not the polite kind I gave during meetings, but the private kind that starts in the chest and spreads quietly outward. I thought about that text again. Caleb's party. The potato salad. The laughter, the endless toasts, the way my mom would lean into every photo with him while I lingered in the background, half cropped out of the frame. Maybe it was time I gave myself something better than cake or pity. Something that lasted. When Jess called that afternoon to ask how my birthday went, I told her the truth. Honestly, pretty standard. Forgotten by the family, saved by office cake. She laughed, but I could tell she heard something heavier in my voice. You ever think about just doing something for you? She asked. Like, really for you? No explanations, no sharing it with them. Her words stuck with me long after we hung up. I found myself opening a real estate app without really knowing why, typing in random searches, quiet neighborhoods, ocean view, small homes near the coast. It wasn't a plan, not yet. It was just curiosity, the kind that flickers alive when you finally stop trying to be reasonable. That night, as I scrolled through listings, one photo stopped me cold. A small, pale yellow house with chipped shutters, standing alone near a narrow strip of beach. The caption read, "Vacation home, sold by owner." Something about it looked unfinished, like it needed someone to finally care about it. Someone who'd stop waiting to be chosen and just claim it. I didn't save it, didn't make a note. But I kept staring at it long after the screen dimmed, the faint reflection of my own face merging with the little house on the water. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something close, a whisper of possibility. And that's when it hit me. Maybe this year wasn't about being remembered. Maybe it was about remembering myself. By Saturday, the entire house smelled like lighter fluid and marinade because my parents believed that smoke and meat could erase any awkwardness, and as I carried the potato salad my mother had assigned me, as if my culinary skills were a punchline everyone had rehearsed, I practiced the calm face I wear to corporate reviews, the one that says I'm listening while quietly filing everything under evidence. Since experience has taught me that the more cheerfully I show up, the more invisible I become, which makes people brave in the worst ways. The backyard was already crowded with neighbors who somehow qualified as family friends and cousins who arrive only when a camera is present, and Caleb, predictably sunlit like a product in a commercial, stood in the center holding court about a business plan that sounded suspiciously like a list of buzzwords he had gathered from podcasts, while Dad flipped steaks and Mom circulated like a cruise director, touching shoulders, adjusting napkins, and announcing to anyone within earshot that her son was finally stepping into his destiny, a phrase so inflated I wanted to pin it down with a fork. I placed the potato salad on the buffet table next to two other potato salads, which felt like a metaphor that should be taught in schools, and before I could escape to the shade my mother floated over to kiss my cheek, her perfume sweet enough to sting. And she murmured that the bowl I brought was a little plain, but we'll dress it up, which, if you speak fluent Matthews, translates to thank you for trying, but we will handle the things that matter, so I nodded and asked where she wanted. Drink stocked, even though I knew she had a plan for that too. Jess texted to ask if I had survived the opening ceremony, and I typed that I was alive, though I had been demoted to condiment intern, then slid my phone away because survival here required both hands. During the toasts, which began before noon because in this family praise is a breakfast food, Dad banged his tongs against a glass and told the story of Caleb's first Little League home run, a tale so polished it has outlived the original ball. And when the laughter swelled, my mother handed me the camera and asked me to take a picture of the birthday boy with his proud parents, a phrase I pretended not to notice as deliberate omission, and I framed them carefully anyway, because if you are going to document your own erasure, you might as well nail the composition. People kept asking me what was new, which is code for we heard nothing and therefore assumed the answer is nothing, and I delivered my standard reply about work being busy but good, while Caleb, standing 2 feet away, outlined his scaling strategy. To a man who installs windows for a living and deserved better conversation, and I decided in that moment that pity and humor could share a seat at my table if they promised to behave. When Mom announced that it was time for the cake, which had an edible photo of Caleb wearing a fishing hat because nothing says adulthood like sugar and nostalgia, she pressed a plastic knife into my palm and asked if I would do the honors. Since you're so steady with details, and I knew exactly what that meant, so I smiled and began slicing with the precision of a person who has been asked her entire life to make chaos look organized, handing plates to guests while counting beats in my head. Until someone asked for a toast from the sister who always has something sweet to say, and my mother clapped her hands as if she had ordered this moment off a menu. I set the knife down, wiped my hands on a napkin that said, "Best day ever," and lifted my cup, deciding that if I had to perform, the role would be mine. I said that I was grateful for a family that celebrated milestones so faithfully, because there is nothing like consistency to make people feel safe, and that Caleb's talent for attracting attention had clearly been a blessing. Not only for his brand but for our collective endurance, since nothing burns calories like clapping. I added that I had learned so much from these gatherings, chiefly how to applaud while holding a plate and how to smile with my mouth closed, which must be a useful skill, because I get asked to do it often. A few guests laughed before they realized the laugh landed strangely, and my mother's smile flickered like a candle in a draft, so I soft-pedaled, as any decent person would, by raising my glass to equal opportunities to be seen. A phrase that sounded harmless until it touched the air, and then I finished with a bright little wish that this year bring room for everyone's calendars, which earned a ripple of confused amusement that I pretended not to hear. The revenge was small and devastating in the precise way I prefer it, because I watched comprehension pass across faces like a cloud discovering the sun, not ruinous enough to ruin a party, but sharp enough to nick the idea that the script was fixed. And before anyone could turn it into a scene, I slipped the camera into my mother's hands and hugged Caleb, telling him he would crush whatever came next, since the compliment cost me nothing and made everyone relax, while I collected my bag and made a show of needing to take a call, which was technically true because I dialed my own number to manufacture the excuse, then drifted through the side gate like smoke that refuses to linger. I drove home with the windows half down, the afternoon heat pushing against my arm, and when I reached my apartment I poured water, kicked off my shoes, and opened my laptop with the kind of calm that sits on top of adrenaline like a paperweight, searching the listings again because the image of that pale yellow house had attached itself to the stubborn part of my brain, the part that has never accepted, maybe next weekend, as a plan, and as the page loaded I saw it still sitting there. No staged photos, no granite counters, just a little square of weathered siding and a thin slice of horizon, along with a line I had missed the first time, a phone number labeled "Owner Prefers Text," which for some reason made the whole thing feel less like shopping and more like knocking on a door I had always walked past. I typed a message that introduced me with plain facts: first name, stable job, serious interest, flexible on timing, then hovered over send, because while I am not superstitious, I respect thresholds, and I let my finger rest just long enough to wonder whether this was boldness or a very expensive coping mechanism, before pressing the screen and watching the bubble float away into the quiet, where a three-dot reply appeared almost immediately and then vanished, reappeared and vanished again, until finally the gray text resolved into a sentence that made my breath hitch despite myself. House is still available. If you want to see it tomorrow morning, bring proof of funds and I'll hand you the keys to walk through alone. Morning came with that clipped, practical light that makes even dusk look purposeful, and because I've learned that resolve is a muscle like any other, I treated it like a training day. Coffee strong enough to take the pain off a boat. Blazer thrown over a plain black dress to signal that I understood numbers as well as adjectives. Bank statements printed and tucked into a folder beside the email confirming my annual bonus, which was larger than the one from last year by a margin that would have made a younger version of me cry in a restroom stall, and as I drove toward the coast with Jess on speaker, we agreed that I would not apologize for wanting something that served no one's performance but my own. That I would walk through the house like a person whose name is already on the deed, and that if the owner tried to sell me on charm I would smile and ask for square meters, roof age, floodplain status, and whether the septic had been pumped within the last 2 years, because romance has its place, but it does not hold back rising water. The owner turned out to be an older woman in sandals and a navy cardigan, kind eyes set against a mouth that had learned difficult years, and when she pressed the keys into my hand she said I had half an hour to wander without a pitch in my ear, that she would sit on the porch with a book and give me space to hear what the place had to say to me, which sounded sentimental until I stepped inside and found that houses do speak when you close the door on your own doubt, because the air held that Faint salt-washed smell I recognize from every childhood trip to the shore we never took as a family, a scent I had taught myself through other people's vacations, and the floors creaked like a violin quietly tuning, and the kitchen, bless it, had no granite or glossy nonsense, just honest countertops and a stubborn window that would rather stick than give up its view of the narrow strip of water that looked like a promise, if you decided to read it that way. I measured with my eyes in the way you do when money has taught you to feel in dimensions, pacing room to room and letting the logistics click into place as if they had been waiting for me to arrive. And in the pale square bedroom with the odd little built-in shelf that could hold nothing useful but secrets, I felt the old, humiliating ache break open and rearrange itself into something steadier. Because there is a difference between being denied a cake and choosing a foundation, and I wanted the latter, and I could afford it without taking a loan that would mortgage my sleep, since the bonus combined with the savings I had guarded like a quiet animal formed a proof of funds stack that even my most critical self could not dismiss as reckless. Jess, on cue, buzzed my phone to ask for a video tour, and I sent her a slow pan across the living room where the light made soft rectangles on the wall, and when she wrote back that the place looked like the aftermath of a storm in all the best ways, slightly battered yet unbroken, I laughed because she was right and because I wanted it, and wanting it did not feel like treason anymore. It felt like sanity. The owner met me at the porch with lemonade and a lawyer's business card, explained that the house had belonged to her aunt who crocheted everything that stayed still, that the estate was done with tact and not much money, that she preferred selling to someone who would live there rather than flip it in 6 weeks for a boast, and when she said her number aloud, I did the math against my folder and told her I could match it with a clean offer and a short inspection window. A sentence that tasted like confidence and mercy at the same time. We sat at the porch table with its sun-cracked varnish and sketched the bones of a deal that would not require theater, and when I texted the draft to my friend who reads contracts like song sheets, she circled back within minutes with small notes about contingencies and a larger note about me finally doing something that did not translate into applause for someone else, after which I initialed in the right places and attached the screenshot from my bank portal that made me blush because no one had ever told me that prudence could feel like seduction when it sat across from possibility. I drove to the branch for a cashier's check, held the envelope like it contained permission, and returned with the kind of deliberate slowness you use when you are not testing fate but escorting it to a chair it already owns. By late afternoon the signed offer had left my phone and the earnest money had left my account. The sky had folded itself into that thin silk blue that pretends evening will never end, and my car smelled like sun-warmed paper. And I realized that the part of the story where I begged to be remembered had finally been replaced by a chapter in which I write my name in ink that does not smudge, which is not to say I did not think about my parents, because ghosts audit victories out of habit. But the thought did not sting, it simply occupied a seat and kept quiet. The family group thread pinged as I parked, my mother's voice arriving as a request wrapped in a statement, because she announced that a few of Caleb's friends were coming over tomorrow morning to brainstorm branding ideas, and would I mind coming early to prep the coffee and set out the muffins, since I had such a knack for presentation and detail. And if I had received that message last year I would have said yes and then disappeared into the wallpaper, but this year I opened my camera, held the lens to the living room window where the water stretched like a patient sentence, slipped a metal tape measure across the sill so the numbers would telegraph their own quiet mathematics, snapped one plain photo without filters or captions, and dropped it into the thread with the sound turned off, after which I set my phone face down, slid the envelope with the bank check under my pillow like a private treaty, and watched the screen flash and flash while I said aloud to the empty room the line that had been waiting to be used for decades, maybe next weekend. I woke before the alarm and lay still long enough to listen to the room settle around me, because there is a particular silence that follows a decision and it feels almost architectural, as if the air itself begins carrying weight in a way it did not the day before, and I wanted to memorize that sensation before the day began shouting its usual instructions. Then, because ritual matters when you are teaching yourself not to ask for permission, I made coffee, opened the envelope with a cashier's check one more time as if the paper might refuse to be real under morning light, placed it back beneath the pillow where I had hidden it like a secret I was finally willing to keep for myself, and set up the shot that had been forming in my head since the owner's text arrived with the phrase about handing me keys to walk through alone. I did not dress the scene, did not tidy the corners that would certainly offend people who curate their lives like hotel lobbies, and I did not write a caption that begged for applause. Instead, I stood in the little living room where the window framed the water like a quiet sentence that refuses to end, held the ring of keys in my palm with the metal tags facing the lens so the address could not be read by any curious opportunist, and let the sunlight do the styling, after which I typed 10 plain words that felt like a private toast to the girl I used to be. The one who waited by a phone that refused to ring. Some birthdays, you give yourself the present and the permission. The photo went up on my feed and into the family thread because I knew my mother would insist she was being excluded if I did not send it, and then I turned the phone face down and walked the perimeter of the house with a notepad, jotting tasks in oversized letters that felt like kindnesses rather than chores. Replace the stubborn screen, oil the bedroom door, test the outlets with the lamp that lives in my trunk because preparedness has been my religion. And by the time I had reached the kitchen, again the phone was skittering across the table like a small animal trying to escape a trap, vibrating under a cascade of messages that, taken together, read like a chorus of people who had mistaken ownership for betrayal. My mother objected first, composing a paragraph that managed to congratulate me for being ambitious, while chiding me for being dramatic in the same breath. And my father followed with a miniature economics lecture about liquidity and unforeseen maintenance costs, as if I had not just financed my own life for a decade while their golden child experimented with careers like a man trying on hats, and Caleb, true to form, sent a voice note that began with a joke about investors and ended with a suggestion that I might consider offering the house for family holidays so that we could bring everyone together. A phrase that did not even bother to hide the assumption that I would buy something and then hand it over like a prop. I could have responded with a long defense dressed as an essay, and a younger version of me would have done just that, marshalling facts and feelings until the argument resembled a courtroom where I always lost on a technicality. But the new rule was simple and I intended to keep it, so I opened the calendar app, blocked the week of my own birthday and the 2 weeks that straddle every holiday they have historically used as excuses to forget me, and created a modest rental schedule with transparent rates that undercut the market by a sliver while requiring a security deposit and a signed agreement specifying noise, guests, and cleaning, because nothing clarifies love like a non-refundable clause. After which I sent a single message to the thread that contained a link to the booking page with 2 neutral sentences explaining that I would be thrilled to host anyone who respected the space and the schedule, that I would not be making exceptions for family because fairness was finally the point, and that I looked forward to seeing them when the calendar allowed. The outrage arrived in a predictable cycle, first disbelief, then indignation, then wounded nostalgia in which my mother remembered a childhood afternoon when I must have felt celebrated, a story that would have been touching if it had actually occurred. And finally the implied threat of withdrawal, a cooling of tone meant to make me chase after warmth, which used to work because I am human and not a stone, except this time the only thing that felt cold was the iced coffee sweating on my table. While I watched the water beyond the glass change color with the hour, the house very gently aligning itself around me like a garment that had been tailored to my actual shape. Jess arrived with a bag of groceries and the expression she wears when she plans to do something noisy but righteous, and together we scrubbed, measured, labeled, and laughed in the way people laugh when they are sanding down old stories while pretending to talk about screws and door hinges, and when we finished she insisted we drive to the discount store because no new life, she announced, begins without sponges, a plunger, and a slightly ridiculous welcome mat with a sentence that sounds like a dare. The revenge, because I have promised myself to serve it in clever portions, was neither a scream nor a slam nor a speech, but a procedural update. I edited the caption to include a second line that read, with the softness of a bandage that does not apologize for covering a wound, that I would be unavailable the morning my mother had requested muffins and coffee for Caleb's branding session because I had a contractor meeting at the place I owned. Though I did note that if they required catering, I could recommend 3 local businesses with excellent muffins and a knack for presentation, after which I muted the thread, handed Jess a set of keys cut at the hardware store by a man who told us the house number sounded lucky, and stood on the little porch where the boards complained under our weight in a voice I already recognized as home. Evening settled like a promise someone might actually keep. The sky turned the color of a polite peach, and the voicemail icon materialized with the patience of a plot that has been waiting off stage, my mother's voice unspooling into the quiet. The opening warm and brittle before sliding into the tone she reserves for family emergencies and financial lectures, except this time there was a tremor I could not place, and she said that I needed to call her back immediately because I was misunderstanding more than a calendar, that I was forgetting what they had done for me, and that if I wanted the full story about why birthdays became complicated in our house, I had better stop playing games and pick up the phone. A sentence that landed like a small stone thrown against glass, not breaking it, not yet, but promising that something on the other side had been waiting to be seen. I did not call back immediately because I have learned that urgency is the oldest trick grief uses to make you drop your boundaries, yet I also recognized the tremor in my mother's voice, a thin wire pulled too tight. So I waited until the water beyond the window shifted to that slate color that makes even expensive mistakes look dignified, and then I pressed her name and let the line ring long enough for both of us to prepare defenses neither of us wanted to use. After which she answered in the bright tone she keeps for holidays and doctors and insisted she was fine before admitting she was not, which is our family's entire theatrical style distilled into a single beat. She said I was choosing spectacle over conversation, that I was punishing them by publishing a purchase, that birthdays had become complicated for reasons I never asked about. And I answered as evenly as I could that asking had never been rewarded in our house, that I had learned to read the room like a weather map. Because questions brought storms, that I had waited years for a rational explanation and received grocery lists and assignments to slice cake, and if there was a story worth hearing she could tell it like an adult and I would listen like one, without rolling up the evidence as a weapon. She took a breath that lasted the length of a confession and told me there had been another baby before me, a girl whose name they had not settled because they were afraid of naming and losing in the same sentence. A pregnancy that went wrong in a way the doctors explained with words that never stuck, and that my birthday arrived wrapped around the anniversary of a day she cannot recount without tasting metal because the room went quiet and then stayed quiet. And when I was born a year later, the silence pressed itself into her and did not leave, so each year she rehearsed celebration and then froze, and your father, she said, chose movement as a cure and turned toward Caleb's noise like a man gripping a rail on a ship that would not steady. And then the years became a habit they could not break without admitting they had been cruel by default rather than design. I stood in my unpainted kitchen with the sun climbing the opposite wall and felt anger do that strange adult thing where it does not dissolve so much as widen to make space for other truths, because loss explains many sins, but it does not wash them clean, and I said as much, gently and then more plainly. Since there is no kind way to say that a child should not have to audition for love because the house is haunted. She asked what I wanted, which is the question parents ask when they are hoping the answer can be purchased with an apology and a cake, and I said I wanted a version of respect that did not require me to shrink. That I wanted calendars honored and words chosen as if mine mattered, that I wanted them to know the house was not a wall but a line, and that they could stand on my side of it if they were willing to stop reaching for my pockets when they could not find their own keys. After which she cried without sound and said she understood more than I gave her credit for, that grief had made her selfish and ritual had made her lazy, and that she would try to be the woman she pretended to be in photographs, which is a promise large enough to light a porch and small enough to fail by dinner. I said I would meet her halfway by telling the truth publicly without names, that I would not weaponize the story, but I would not hide it either, and that my first house rule was simple and final: I do not host the forgetting of me. The revenge I chose, because revenge is only useful when it doubles as repair, was administrative and tender at once. I opened a new account named for the date my family pretended did not exist, linked it to the booking page under a quiet option called Community Nights, and set every birthday week to donate the full rental to a local fund that covers grief counseling and neonatal support. A ledger line that would stain no one and help someone I would never meet, while also carving into the year. A space that could not be filled with someone else's candles, and when I added the note to my post, one additional sentence that read that some gifts are not meant to be kept. I felt the house breathe in a way that made my arms ache with a relief I had not expected to feel. My phone chimed with a message from Caleb that began with defensiveness and ended with something like envy, and I wrote back one sentence about doors being open to people who wipe their feet, a petty line disguised as hospitality, then muted him again and watched a goal skate the wind like it had paid its bills and earned the right to be inefficient for a minute. By dusk, a courier knocked with a small padded envelope addressed in my mother's hand, the kind of throwback gesture she uses when words feel safer on paper, and inside I found a hospital tag yellowed to the color of old butter, stamped with our last name and a date 2 days earlier than the one on my birth certificate, a mismatch that could have been clerical error or cover story or proof of the panic that used to live in our kitchen, and beneath it a folded photograph of my mother looking young and hollow in a way I recognized too well, holding a swaddled absence like a fact she could not yet name. I placed both in the drawer beside the tape measure and closed it gently, because artifacts do not arbitrate. They only accuse or absolve depending on the light. When the sky finally turned velvet and the first renters confirmed for the holiday I had already blocked from family use, my screen lit again with a new message from Caleb that read that Mom says there is more I should hear and that Dad will deny it, that the dates are not what I think, that some papers were changed at the courthouse for reasons that looked like kindness at the time, and the words crawled across my palm like a fuse asking to be lit, while the water outside kept making and unmaking its own answers on the shore, patient as law, indifferent as tide.